Maryland is the ninth smallest state in America, and if it disappeared tomorrow, you probably wouldn't notice. Not at first, at least. There'd be no immediate panic, no breaking news banners, no sense that anything important was missing. For a moment, it would feel like nothing changed at all. And then, quietly, things would start to fail. Communications, military coordination, data and commerce, it would all start to stutter. Within days, the effects wouldn't just be noticeable, they'd be impossible to ignore. Because Maryland isn't just small, it's hidden. And right now, it's under pressure. If Maryland fails, it won't feel like a local problem. It'll feel like everything stopped at once. Maryland's size gives it an advantage. It's right in the middle of everything. Bordering Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., they're all on its doorstep. And that makes it a highly convenient location for just about everything. Because in many ways, Washington, D.C.'s loss is Maryland's gain. The U.S. has an unusual system for its capital. D.C. is densely packed, filled with government buildings and close to 700,000 people. That means some of the government's most important functions have to go elsewhere. Virginia is usually the first choice. Quantico, Arlington, Norfolk, they all host national facilities, but they're spread out. A lot of the state still lacks a strong federal presence. In Maryland, it's different. Here, it's unavoidable. The proximity, the density, the network of hubs, it all converges in one small space. The federal government is the largest employer in the state, and much of it concentrates on one place, Fort Meade. Just 23 miles northeast of Washington, D.C. lies Fort George G. Meade, a massive army base that many call the brain of the United States government. Inside its walls, the National Security Agency, the place where some of the country's most sensitive operations actually happen. And that's just scratching the surface of what's in this one spot. Since 2010, Fort Meade has also been home to U.S. Cyber Command, the newest front in the intelligence wars. The computers here don't just keep the internet running, they protect the nation itself. Every message, every transaction, every secret mission passes through these systems. And it's not just about the data either. It's about the people. Fort Meade also hosts other agencies focused on code breaking, secure communications, and intelligence operations. In other words, if you need something kept secret, Maryland is where America keeps it. Whether Maryland itself can keep the secrets from rising sea levels and aging bridges is a different question entirely. Maryland is in a unique position, essentially surrounding the federal government's seat of power while not being a part of it. That's nearly 5% of the entire state workforce dependent on one employer. So decisions don't just affect Maryland, they operate through it. That would seem to be a reason that D.C. would be invested in keeping Baltimore and Maryland as a whole healthy and well-funded, but that's not always the case. It's not just about proximity, it's also about color. Maryland is one of the most politically homogenous states in the country, voting heavily Democratic by double digits in every presidential election since 1992. Its congressional delegation is largely Democratic, though shifts due to redistricting could put some seats at risk. Both senators are solidly Democratic, as is the governor. So when a Democrat is in the House, Maryland usually feels pretty comfortable. But when those tables turn, everything is up in the air. Each new administration makes thousands of decisions about how to distribute federal resources. It's inevitable that there are always winners and losers. This includes big decisions like where to place new facilities, and Maryland is somewhat insulated from changing moods on that. The advantages of proximity to federal hubs in Maryland and Virginia are simply too great to ignore. But beyond federal property, the state still heavily leans on government choices. Every key resource, every critical system depends on decisions made far beyond its borders. Decisions that can ripple through the region in ways few realize. And it doesn't always have the leverage. Maryland's politics add another layer of uncertainty. Requests for port upgrades, bridge repairs, or transit improvements are rarely automatic. Support flows more easily under one administration, while under another, every proposal faces scrutiny. But when there's a crisis, everyone's on the same side, usually. Nearly every major population center sits along the water, so when the storms roll in, Maryland is exposed. And unlike most coastal regions, Maryland's critical systems sit right in the line of fire. A single power grid failure could knock out key operations. Damage to military equipment could halt essential missions. Infrastructure problems can cripple an entire city or state. Take the Francis Scott Key Bridge cutting across the Patapsco River in the heart of Baltimore. Every day, the Port of Baltimore funnels over $100 million in goods, an artery the entire economy depends on. At least it did, until March of 2024. It only took one incident to show what happens when a system without redundancy fails. A cargo ship, the MV Dolly, lost power and began drifting. A mayday call went out just in time to stop traffic. The anchor dropped, but it wasn't enough. The ship kept moving straight toward the bridge. The ship slammed into the southwest pier. A section of the structure gave way almost instantly, collapsing into the water below. 6 construction workers were killed. But the real impact wasn't the collapse. It was everything that stopped with it. And the effects would be felt for years. Within hours, the port was frozen. 11 ships sat stranded, trapped with no way out, while only a narrow channel remained open. Clearing the debris alone would take weeks, and rebuilding the bridge, years. The real danger? This port moves more cars and farm equipment than any other in the country. With that flow suddenly halted, shortages would spread quickly. There was no clean reroute, no parallel system waiting to absorb the shock. And the damage here wouldn't be confined to Maryland either. Maersk, the charter company of the ship, saw its stock lose 2% of its value immediately. The blocked port caused heavy shipping delays in the United States and beyond. Shippers struggled to find alternate ports to unload their goods. Above ground, I-695 faces heavy detours to this day, especially for trucks. It's estimated it'll be 2030 before the new span is completed. There is no way of knowing the exact financial loss. Much of it came from businesses across Baltimore and around the port. Best estimates, over $4 billion in economic activity ground to a halt along with the bridge. And the worst part is, there's no guarantee it couldn't happen again. What is guaranteed is you hitting that subscribe button. That's the only way to make sure you catch the next deep dive into how geography shapes risks you don't always see. The Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse wasn't about corruption, negligence, or shoddy maintenance. The real cause was far simpler than that, and far more unsettling if you ask me. The sheer density and precise nature of commerce in the region. Efficiency created the vulnerability. One misstep in Maryland doesn't stay local. It sets off a domino effect, rippling through the region for years and demanding massive federal intervention to recover. So the question changes again. What happens when it's not one failure? The initial chaos lasted 11 weeks. For most of that time, only a narrow channel kept the port barely moving. By June 10th, traffic resumed, but that was just the first hurdle. Attention then turned to the bigger task, rebuilding. The bridge's replacement was originally estimated at under $2 billion. Within months, that figure had more than doubled. The silver lining? The federal government stepped in to cover the cost. But even with the money, restoring full function to a region this critical would take years. Concentration creates efficiency, but it also removes margin for error. Fortunately, the military is nearby, although that may create an even bigger target. 28 miles south of Fort Meade lies Joint Base Andrews, the headquarters for the D.C. Air National Guard. As well as being responsible for critical helicopter operations around Washington, D.C., this is the home base for Air Force One. So now the concentration isn't just intelligence, it's continuity of government. A third site sits farther out, Aberdeen Proving Ground, about 50 miles northeast of Fort Meade. More isolated, more controlled, and exactly what you'd expect from a place where military hardware is pushed to its limits before deployment. But that isolation cuts both ways. What's tested here isn't just powerful, it's experimental, classified, and irreplaceable. But distance doesn't mean much anymore. A long-range strike on a handful of locations in Maryland could take out a massive share of the country's security infrastructure, blinding key agencies at the exact moment they're needed most. And the unsettling part is, it might not take an enemy at all. The Key Bridge showed what happens when one artery fails. Maryland has dozens of them, and the water is rising toward all of them. The University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science paints a grim future, one where beaches are eroded, islands become uninhabitable, and millions of dollars are lost. The losses won't be in inches, but in feet. Looking into the immediate future, the scientists believe the sea levels around Maryland could rise between 1 and 1.6 feet by 2050. By 2100, some areas could see up to 5 feet of water submerging the coastline. That kind of rise doesn't just flood beaches. It threatens critical coastal infrastructure, such as the low-lying U.S. Naval Academy campus in Annapolis and key port, transit, and utility facilities around Baltimore that sit at or near current high tide levels. In extreme projections where water rises nearly 6 feet, it wouldn't even be just the beaches at risk. All of Maryland's economic centers would be under threat. Baltimore Harbor could overflow, flooding some of the state's biggest tourist attractions. Large parts of Annapolis, home to the state government, and significant federal military installations would also be at risk. Once water reaches these levels, it's no longer about adaptation, it becomes a question of relocation, and the warning signs are already here. Over the last few years, Maryland's salt marshes have begun dying, no longer able to build up sediment fast enough to survive rising tides. Without these natural buffers, the coastline becomes far more vulnerable to erosion and storm surges. Annapolis and Baltimore are already starting to report more frequent flooding after heavy rainfall, putting homes, roads, and critical infrastructure at increasing risk. Residents are now asking if Maryland will remain livable if this continues. The clock is ticking. Island residents and vacationers see less of their favorite spots each year. In Ocean City, one costly flood could erase an entire tourist season, shutting down amusement parks and seaside businesses, resulting in an estimated $2 to $3 billion in lost revenue. And that's not the worst-case scenario. The Chesapeake region experiences some of the highest rates of land recession on the East Coast. Experts say it's only a matter of time before some islands become uninhabitable. Coastal ecosystems face die-offs, threatening plants and animals. Nature doesn't need a target list, but Maryland's enemies do. And the map they're working from looks a lot like the one I just described. But not every threat is indiscriminate. As the hub of federal operations, Maryland is high on any terrorist or saboteur's target list. Since 9/11, security has reached unprecedented levels, preventing large-scale attacks. But there are some things the government can't plan for, and counterterrorism experts warn that the risk of a surprise attack is rising again. The biggest modern threat might not be physical at all either. Cities like Baltimore, while not the primary target compared to DC or federal hubs, would still suffer. Recovery might be slower compared to more secure areas. An EMP strike disrupting systems at Fort Meade would directly degrade intelligence coordination and response capabilities, further slowing regional recovery efforts. But in today's high-tech world, an EMP might not be needed. In 2020, Russian hackers spent months inside U.S. government networks, including systems connected to the NSA at Fort Meade, before anyone noticed. They didn't break down the door, they walked in through a routine software update. Agencies that weren't seriously affected spoke up. The NSA didn't, which is telling. A large-scale cyber attack designed to take down the federal government's infrastructure would throw essential systems into chaos. Maryland would be directly affected, as Fort Meade is a likely target. Transit and utilities could be paralyzed, causing long-term disruption for both government operations and residents. Maryland sits so close to the heart of the federal government that any disruption there immediately reaches beyond its borders. Starve the state of resources, and DC itself could be at risk. But too much federal attention has its own consequences. Commutes and routines are constantly shaped by proximity to power. After 9/11, for example, the TSA's intensified screenings were first imposed at Baltimore's airport. The question nobody in Washington wants to answer is what happens when both fail at once, and whether the political system that would need to respond is capable of agreeing there's a crisis before it becomes one. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack. 2045. Europe enters the year everyone feared, but no one planned for. The European Union hasn't collapsed yet, but the machinery holding it together has started to show its flaws. Borders are hardening. Governments are openly defying Brussels. The shared currency is under pressure, and for the first time, leaders aren't asking how to fix the EU. They're asking what happens if it can't be fixed at all. This video is not predicting a collapse. This is mapping out the chain reaction that could follow. What fractures first, what gets replaced next, and how fast the EU starts getting treated like it's optional, then irrelevant. The warning signs have been there for decades, but fixing them is hard because the system only works when everyone follows the same rules. And right now, they don't. The EU is a broad political and economic union, 27 countries working together on laws, trade, and shared rules. There's also the Schengen, which is different. It's the passport-free travel zone inside Europe where most internal border checks are gone. It includes most EU countries, plus a few non-EU ones, like Switzerland and Norway. And it's not a perfect overlap either. Ireland is in the EU, but not the Schengen, while Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein are Schengen, but not in the EU. You still with me? If you want a roadmap, you can start with how an organization handles a crisis. And in Europe's case, the obvious starting point is the borders. For decades, internal borders felt almost invisible. People could come and go. The US grew fast, partly because it functioned like one big open market. But Europe isn't the US, and that's a problem. Enter the Schengen zone. It started small in 1985 with just 5 countries: France, Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. But when it became EU law in 1999, it helped turn Europe into one shared space, where people in business could move freely and investors could count on stability. However, Britain and Ireland opted out. That wasn't a coincidence. The troubles in Northern Ireland were still lingering. The Good Friday Agreement, the peace deal that ended decades of conflict, was only a year old. No one knew if it would last. At that time, free movement was a huge security risk. But it was fine for the rest of Europe, until it wasn't. In 2015, Europe's southern border didn't just see a spike, it was overwhelmed. Boats landed non-stop, reception centers filled up, paperwork stopped meaning anything. And along the roads out of Greece and the Balkans, families started moving north in long, desperate lines, on foot, by bus, with whatever they could carry. Many were fleeing Syria. Others came from Iraq, Eritrea, Somalia. Different stories, but with the same goal: don't get stuck at the edge of Europe. On paper, the EU's Dublin III rules said asylum seekers had to stay in the first country they applied in. But that was a loophole. Southern countries took the pressure while the migrants kept moving, aiming for Germany, Sweden, and beyond. Then, one night in Paris changed everything. On November 13th, coordinated terrorist attacks killed 130 people. Hundreds more were injured. French officials confirmed that at least some of the attackers used the migrant crisis to slip through unnoticed. Suddenly, it wasn't just a humanitarian crisis. It was a security crisis, and the moment Europe's trust in its own system started to fracture. So what did France do? It declared a state of emergency. Border controls were back. They were supposed to be temporary, but temporary became the new normal. EU-wide rules started colliding with national politics, and countries began making their own calls. Britain, detached from mainland Europe, watched on. And less than a year later, the UK voted to leave the European Union. And that was just the first vote in a wider political shift that was about to hit the continent. But border pressure doesn't just change policy. It changes who gets elected. Another war breaking out in the Middle East or Africa. Another flood of non-European refugees. A large-scale terror attack or a series of smaller ones increases public suspicion. It all has an effect. The natural response is to demand decisive action, and EU institutions aren't built to move fast under pressure. More hardline Eurosceptics get into national office, riding off the back of immigration and security issues. Even the traditional parties get drawn in, much like the government of Sweden. People there got increasingly tired with Sweden's open-door immigration policy. But now the Swedish Democrats are part of Stockholm's governing coalition, something that was unthinkable back in 2015, and they could be a force multiplier in deciding Europe's future. So when politicians say they want to withdraw from Schengen or even the euro, it's not just rhetoric. To understand why the EU struggles to respond, you have to understand how it's built. The European Union doesn't officially describe itself as a confederation, but in practice, it shares many of the same features, with some important differences. Basically, Europe's leaders decided they wanted to be like a United States of Europe. But they set up an organization that looks more like the United States as it was under the Articles of Confederation. Critics call this the EU's democratic deficit. In a crisis, the EU can't operate like a country because it simply isn't one, which isn't ideal when a scandal hits and public trust takes another hit with it. A big one was blown open in 2022 when leaked documents alleged that officials in the parliament were taking bribes from the Qataris, and the investigation raised broader concerns about foreign influence efforts. And that's not the only issue that drags the EU down. The euro delivered clear benefits, but not evenly across Europe. It sprang to life on January 1st, 1999, and just 3 years later, it was the official legal currency for all the members of the Eurozone. But Britain stayed out. Replacing the pound would mean replacing Queen Elizabeth II's face on their money. But in all seriousness, it wasn't just for vanity. Just look at the charts. Germany did get a pretty big GDP boost. Just take a look at this line versus this one. In 1999, Germany's real GDP per capita was around $26,700. In 2024, it was just under $56,000. Italy, Spain, Greece, they didn't see those kinds of gains. But here's the interesting part. The euro doesn't reflect the health of Germany, but the Eurozone as a whole. Germany's economy is typically healthier than the Eurozone. That means German goods priced in euros are less expensive than they would be if they were in the old Deutschmark. But the artificially weak currency means more demand for German goods abroad. So the German economy gets to be defined as a trade surplus. Germany's productivity growth improves its national competitiveness. There's also no risk of exchange rate shocks to trade in the Eurozone. Single currency, no different currencies to be exchanged. Simple. But other countries don't get that same benefit. In the early 2010s, the so-called PIGS, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain, became the face of the Eurozone debt crisis. The problem was pretty simple. The Eurozone had a shared currency, but not a shared financial system. There was one monetary policy, but no shared balance sheet. These were still separate national economies with separate credit ratings, just locked into the same money. During the boom years, borrowing was cheap and governments took advantage. Then the credit crunch hit, loans got called in, and the weakest economies were expected to pay up fast, just without the tools they used to have. In the past, they could adjust their own monetary policy to absorb the shock. Now they couldn't. They were tied to the same central banking system. Germany and France backed bailouts but demanded austerity in return. They didn't want inflation weakening the currency, and that exposed the North-South divide in a brutal way. It fueled resentment that still hasn't gone away. Germany benefited more from the system, while others paid a higher price during downturns. The results are pretty clear. If you want to park your money somewhere, it makes much more sense to do it in the United States. That means the euro gets weaker and the EU doesn't get as much tax revenue from the investments. Now, add energy decisions with serious trade-offs to the mix. Europe wanted to lead the move away from fossil fuels, but the transition created new vulnerabilities. Germany shut down its nuclear plants. Russian gas filled the gap until the Ukraine war ripped that plant apart. Electricity prices surged. And Germany, the engine of Europe, got hit the hardest. High power costs dragged down factories and pushed jobs elsewhere. The German economy shrank in 2023 and 2024. At this point, the EU isn't failing because of one crisis. It's failing because every problem compounds with the next one. Energy shocks weaken industry. A weaker economy means less investment. And less investment means Europe falls further behind in the race it can't afford to lose: technology. Of the world's 50 biggest tech companies, only a few of them are European. Meanwhile, the US keeps producing trillion-dollar giants like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. So, Brussels pivots to a different kind of solution, the digital euro. Supporters frame it as convenience. Critics see something else, a system that could expand financial oversight. A digital wallet tied to your identity, where transactions could be tracked more closely, depending on how it's designed. And then proposals like the Savings and Investment Union enter the picture, trying to channel private savings into more investment, a move critics warn could shift risk onto ordinary savers. Because now Euroscepticism doesn't feel theoretical. It feels like a warning sign. Then, the next financial crisis comes, or terrorist attacks strike at the heart of mainland Europe. Even more populist Eurosceptic parties start getting into office. Germany narrowly avoided the alternative for Germany becoming a force in government in 2025. But the trend line is clear, and the next election could bring a bigger shock. The newcomers are either in government or strong enough to force the traditional parties to see things their way. And the EU responds the way it usually does. Not with an election or a major reform, but with another conference. All the while, things get worse. So, one of the countries decides to just ignore the bureaucrats in Brussels and solve its own problems. Maybe it's inspired by Poland and withdraws from the Dublin regulations. That's a big moment, because once a country openly ignores EU asylum law, the question stops being about paperwork and starts being about borders. What's to stop a country withdrawing from the Schengen altogether? At the moment, the likeliest candidate for this is probably Sweden. The Sweden Democrats aren't going anywhere. Maybe it's a terrorist attack. Maybe it's a riot. That's all the Sweden Democrats would need to get more bargaining power. One of their big demands right now, renegotiate Sweden's place in the Schengen Agreement. Now with the crisis and Europe's weakness, they have the clout to do it. And the Schengen reaction gets faster. The EU lacks the true authority to force member states into compulsion. It's not like the US federal government that could raise an army when the South decided to go its own way in 1861. With Sweden's success, other countries that attract migrants decide they don't need to take them either. And while this is happening, Greece and Italy have their own problems. With the economy rocky, they decide to retaliate by withdrawing from the euro. France has shifted further to the right too, and it decides to take the invitation to fix its finances by bringing the franc back. France doesn't leave immediately, but the direction is now obvious. Say another economic downturn lands. National governments are suddenly powerless to provide relief. With the right monetary policy, people start to panic and protest, and then it happens. One of the EU members bows to public pressure and leaves the euro. The likeliest candidate for that would be the ones you're pretty familiar with by now: Italy, Spain, or Greece. But there is a possibility elsewhere, a much more damaging one. France has been in chaos lately. The country's debt-to-GDP ratio is 111%. Sure, it's a lot lower than Greece, but about the same as Spain and higher than Portugal's. But that's just the public debt. Add the private sector and household debt, and you get a consolidated debt of 350% of GDP. So now you can see how the dominoes really begin to fall. The people demand a change, and the government caves. France was always the risk. Now it's the breaking point. With France out, there's no way the euro can survive. The chaos escalates. Euro-dominated bonds and assets go absolutely haywire. People don't know what to do, and trade slows to a crawl. The financial crisis gets much worse. For all intents and purposes, the EU stops functioning the way it used to. Global trade is the first victim. The EU is one of America's biggest trading partners. That means it's also the biggest customer for American oil and natural gas. Now, who knows? So American producers have to raise prices on domestic customers to make up the shortfall. That means America's economy slows or shrinks. The EU is China's second largest trading partner, and one they can't afford to lose. A collapse in EU demand would shove it deeper into a recession. At the same time, Russia would see Europe's chaos as an opening. Not just to pressure Ukraine again, but to test the Baltics, betting the West won't respond. Back in Europe, that's the nightmare scenario. Economic shock turns into a security vacuum, and suddenly the EU isn't just struggling to stay united, it's struggling to stay safe. So what does Europe do? Well, there's nothing like the threat of invasion for you to get your house in order. So Europe probably finds a way to come together again, just in a different form. Think something like the European Economic Community before the 1992 Maastricht Treaty. Trade zone? Good. Tying everyone together without a democratic mandate and a much more centralized economic policy? Bad. It's a harsh lesson. The European Union wanted to be a United States of Europe, but something was overlooked. The United States of America was new on the world stage, founded in a new world by people who spoke the same language and shared common traditions and experiences. And even creating that was a giant headache. Tying countries with thousands of years of different traditions, cultures, and languages together? Orders of magnitude harder. This is still just a hypothetical. There's a lot to lose if the EU collapses. That usually keeps people around. But there's probably a safe prediction to make. Whatever European institutions there are by the end of the century will be very different from the ones that were there at the beginning. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. Really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MapPack. Take a look at a map of Europe. See those straight roads slicing across Britain? And the ports thriving in places that make no geographic sense? Those cities sitting on dry hills with fountains still flowing? That isn't natural geography, it's Roman engineering. Fact number 30. In Spain's Rio Tinto, miners unearthed a massive wooden wheel buried in the dirt. What they uncovered wasn't just a wheel, it was a machine that turned geography into gold. Literally, it was a Roman water wheel, pulling water from deep mines and supercharging gold and silver extraction. Imagine a Roman miner knee-deep in the mud, watching this wheel turn, every rotation fueling armies and cities he'd never see. And while miners marveled at spinning wheels, engineers were facing an even bigger challenge: how to bring down entire mountains. Number 29. Romans figured out how to bring down whole mountains using a process called ruina montium. They unleashed massive water pressure to weaken, then collapse sections of a mountain. Workers faced being crushed by falling rocks or swept away by flooding as part of the job. Today, we can still see examples of this throughout Europe. Once the mountains were conquered, the question became, where could you even build a road across an empire this vast? Number 28. Unlike today's pothole-filled streets, Rome built more than 186,000 miles of Roman roads so sturdy that many of them are still around today. Made from hard volcanic rock and granite, they connected a sprawling empire. The roads moved people and products across Europe, Asia, and North Africa, and unintentionally spread non-native species, changing local ecosystems for good. Roads made travel possible, but surviving the winter was another matter entirely. Number 27. If you got through the winter without frostbite, thank the Romans. They came up with a heating system called hypocaust heating, sending warm air through floors and walls. It kept everything from private homes to public baths warm, and without it, building big, crowded cities in colder climates would have been a lot harder. Warm floors were one thing, but how do you make sure news and orders move as fast as your armies? Number 26. Conquering land is one thing, holding it is another. To keep his regions connected and taxes flowing, Augustus created the cursus publicus, Rome's imperial postal system. A messenger could cover around 50 miles a day. But with a relay of horses, messages could travel almost 170 miles each day. Messages could fly across the empire, but the roads themselves had to survive centuries of use and disasters. Number 25. Known as opus caementicum, Roman concrete is why so many of their structures and roads are still standing. They mixed lime with volcanic ash, pozzolana, water, and other materials to make a remarkably durable building material. The lime made it self-healing. Cracks sealed themselves over decades, a feat modern engineers still marvel at. One of these systems is still quietly powering a modern city today. But first, hit that subscribe button. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was this channel. While engineers kept buildings standing, farmers were fighting a different battle, the soil itself. Number 24. The aratrum was an iron-tipped plow that vastly improved soil cultivation. Romans used it to farm more land more efficiently and with less labor than ever before. This allowed the Roman population and the populations of every civilization who used the same technology later to thrive. Fertile fields fed people, but someone had to turn all that grain into bread for the masses. Number 23. In Barbegal, France, archaeologists discovered a Roman complex of 16 water wheels, possibly the world's first mega factory. At its peak, it ground enough flour to feed 27,000 people daily. This wasn't just a village mill, it was an industrial complex feeding an entire city. But where does the water come from to sustain these bustling cities? Number 22. Not only did the Romans revolutionize city water delivery, they did it using nothing but gravity, sloping channels that carried water across impossible terrain. Roman citizens were able to live in cities that shouldn't exist, perched on dry hills with water flowing from miles away into fountains, baths, and cisterns. The Aqua Virgo still flows today, feeding Rome and even the Trevi Fountain, a reminder of how daring engineering reshaped the map. If water could flow uphill, Romans wondered what else they could move. Maybe even whole lakes. Number 21. Romans drained lakes on a massive scale. In the 1st century AD, they lowered Fucine Lake to stop flooding and get rid of the malaria-spreading mosquitoes that lived there. They did it by building a long tunnel with a slight downward slope to drain the water. A few centuries earlier, they drained Lake Albano, all because an oracle said they'd never win in battle as long as the water stayed. Slightly less practical, but still impressive. With floods controlled, cities could grow taller, literally. Number 20. Apartments. That's right, Romans invented apartments, or insulae. The ground floor had shops, and people lived above them. But back then, higher floors weren't luxury penthouses. They were for the poorer residents, because the whole climbing stairs thing was a pain. Still, this high-density housing revolutionized urban construction, letting cities grow upward and house millions. Stacking people in buildings is one way to organize a city. Stacking knowledge, that's another. Number 19. Scrolls might have looked impressive, but they were long, unwieldy, and hard to share across the Roman Empire. So Romans came up with an early version of the Codex, stacking pages of papyrus to make a primitive notebook. Knowledge spread faster than ever, letting distant territories receive blueprints, scientific discoveries, and vital information, and changing the development of the Roman world forever. The Codex helped spread ideas, but how do you move water miles across a city without modern tools? Number 18. Almost none of Rome's engineering feats, especially aqueducts, would have been possible without the Corabat. It was a 20-foot table with plumb lines and a water level that allowed surveyors to measure precise gradients so water flowed smoothly across miles. One wrong gradient and Rome doesn't get water. No water, no city. Surveyors ensured water flowed. Soldiers ensured cities survived. Number 17. The gladius sword. This short, double-edged sword lets soldiers remain in tight formations and deal deadly thrusts with precision. Romans slashed their way to battlefield supremacy with the gladius sword, allowing them to conquer a huge swath of Eurasia and change the course of history. While weapons may have defended the empire, sanitation defended lives. Number 16. A great development for those who don't love dying of flooding or cholera, and an innovation that keeps our city streets and grounds relatively clean to this day. Rome is surrounded by hills. The Cloaca Maxima drained the rainwater and wastewater that frequently swamped the city, making it livable. It still drains the Forum today. Drainage kept streets clean, but keeping citizens informed was a challenge of a different sort. Number 15. Before cable news came the daily acts, or the Acta Diurna. Romans published daily updates that mixed military victories, political decrees, and spin, almost like today's media. The daily acts were crucial for keeping military campaigns going with majority citizen support. If words could shape minds, materials shaped the empire itself. Number 14. Opus Signum. Romans revolutionized waterproofing materials to make some of the most durable structures on Earth. Opus Signum was made of cement and crushed terracotta, and it kept aqueducts operating by making sure water didn't leak all over the place. This helped lead to the invention of plumbing. Concrete held water in place, but the land had to yield crops to feed the people. Number 13. Romans attached tools called coulters to their plows, revolutionizing agriculture in northern Europe. When the empire expanded north, they realized Mediterranean plows couldn't handle the heavy, sticky soils of the region. The coulter, a vertical blade mounted in front of the plow, cut deep into turf, roots, and thick soil. Farmers in Gaul could marvel as the coulter sliced through roots and tough soil, turning impossible fields into fertile ground. But when you have an empire, you have enemies. Number 12. The Corvus, a boarding bridge with a spike, helped Rome turn the tides against Carthage. Rome hadn't mastered naval warfare yet, while Carthage ruled the seas. Roman sailors leapt onto enemy decks using the Corvus, turning sea battles into hand-to-hand fights. Up close, Rome had the advantage. They won the Punic Wars and changed history. So how do you navigate an empire so vast? Number 11. There's little point in a huge road network if you don't know how far every place is from another. That's why milestones lined the roads from Rome and the Millennium Arium, the Golden Milestone, so travelers always knew how far they were from the city. This made it possible to map the entire Roman road network with precision. Knowing the way is one thing, but sometimes you have to build your own harbor to make the journey possible. Number 10. Instead of relying mostly on natural harbors, Rome went ahead and constructed artificial, deep-water ports wherever they felt like it. This changed where trade and shipping could happen. In addition to the imperial port of Portus, ports like Corinth's Lycaon sprang up along exposed coastlines, thanks to Rome's engineering and dredging know-how. Ports altered coastlines. Cofferdams shaped rivers. Number 9. How did Romans build massive bridges in flowing rivers? It's not like they had scuba divers. They used cofferdams, watertight enclosures in riverbeds that could be pumped dry. A single construction team could temporarily hold back a river, something most people couldn't imagine at the time. Even today, modern versions of cofferdams are used to construct bridges all over the world. Water could be controlled, but the sun was another resource waiting to be harnessed. Number 8. Turns out the Romans were all about green energy. They used passive solar architecture featuring huge glass windows to heat public buildings and bathhouses. They also concentrated solar power to light torches. It became so important that by the 6th century AD, Roman legislators guaranteed sun rights for their citizens. Moving right along, ever seen a viaduct and think, how? Number 7. Romans were the first to understand how useful arches could be in engineering. By distributing weight down and out, arches let them, and every civilization after, build massive structures like the Colosseum. A single keystone could hold up a bridge or aqueduct, allowing Romans to build larger, taller, and stronger than ever before. Structures rise, but without maps, you might never find them. Number 6. Rome developed the world's first travel guides called itineraria, making Romans the first tourists in the world. These guides mapped routes, stops, distances, and other essentials for travelers and traders. The most famous is the Tabula Peutingeriana, which survives thanks to a 13th century copy, even though the original is lost. Cartography wasn't just practical, it reshaped how Romans imagined the world. Charts let people navigate the land, and Romans also learned how to farm the sea. Number 5. Aquaculture let Romans keep seawater fish and oysters in shallow lagoons so they could harvest them whenever they wanted. Wealthier homes even had vivaria, basically the ancient version of a restaurant lobster tank. A wealthy Roman might pluck a fish from a private tank for dinner. The original choose-your-own-meal experience. Today, aquaculture is the fastest-growing food sector and is practiced almost everywhere. Seafood is one thing. Rome still needed forests, though, for fuel ships and buildings. Number 4. Deforestation. Rome's inventions and projects required a massive amount of timber for fuel, construction, and new farmland. Entire forests across Europe were cut down to meet the need. Imagine entire landscapes stripped of trees while Rome's ships, homes, and fortifications rose from the wood. Today, much of the former Roman Empire has very few virgin forests left. and much of that loss traces back to Roman activity. And all those trees had to go somewhere. Number 3, Romans turned shipbuilding into a massive industry, as the ruins at Portus show. Shipwrights studied enemy vessels, then built stronger, faster ships that dominated the Mediterranean. This created the Mare Nostrum, our sea, turning the Mediterranean into a united trading bloc rather than a barrier. Ships sailed, battles raged, and the medics were the quiet difference between victory and defeat. Number 2. Ancient Rome was the first civilization to embed a team of field doctors and medics in its armies, changing the dynamics of global warfare. Historians credit army medics with fewer battlefield losses for Rome, healthier soldiers, and most importantly, improved morale. It allowed Rome to conduct long-term, large-scale campaigns to conquer the known world. And an empire needed to run on rules, and sometimes they weren't very fair. Finally, number 1. 2,000 years later, Europe's roads and cities still follow Roman lines. Not only that, but the Roman Republic inspired modern democracies and invented the loopholes that let empires get away with mass slavery for centuries. Direct democracy was too messy for a sprawling empire, so citizens elected representatives to make the tough decisions. You can thank Rome for giving over 150 countries the blueprint for democratic government. One thing is clear, Rome didn't just conquer territory. It rerouted rivers, leveled mountains, built cities where none should exist. The empire may have collapsed today, but the geography it engineered never did. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack. In 2025, 1 in 5 people live in a real democracy. The rest? Well, that's another story. We're ranking the most ruthless and sometimes bizarre regimes that are still standing today. And don't forget, if you like these weekly map dives, hit that subscribe button because, well, my student loans refuse to accept likes as payment. Starting us off with number 15, the Neo-Sultan. We begin our tour in Turkey, the odd man out of NATO. You'd think that the alliance sets the standard when it comes to protecting democracy, but its second largest military seems to have skimmed that part of the rulebook. On the VDEM think tank's Liberal Democracy Index, Turkey comes in at 139th in the world, below countries usually scolded with a firm, "We're not angry, just disappointed." Turkey's been moonwalking out of democracy for 20 years, and the man leading the dance? Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He's been president since 2014, before that prime minister since 2003. He's the most influential leader since Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the republic's founder. But influence is a double-edged sword. Useful in battle, not so much when you're the one holding the pointy end. On July 10th, 2020, history was reversed. The Hagia Sophia went from a museum back to a mosque. That one move symbolized Turkey's transformation. Kemal wanted a secular, modern nation-state. Erdogan took that as a personal diss. Kemal saw himself as a Western-style leader. Erdogan sees himself as a cosplay sultan. He's fanboying so hard he threatened the United States with an Ottoman slap. That was over American support for the Kurds. Washington laughed it off. The Turkish people weren't so lucky. Erdogan is one of 2 leaders in this video with a prison record. He was sentenced to 10 months and stripped of his office as mayor of Istanbul because he recited a poem that the court said was an incitement of religious hatred. And you thought poetry slams were painful. He served just 4 months before being released, and the ban on his entry into the Turkish parliament was lifted. A lot of people wish it hadn't been. Once Erdogan changed Turkey's system from a parliamentary to a presidential one in 2014, he began ruling with an iron fist. One by one, he shut down opposition groups working against the state and independent media. Which, as everyone knows, is exactly what you do when you've got nothing to hide. A coup attempt in July 2016 only fueled the fire. over 200 journalists were rounded up and 120 publications were closed. 4 years later, he put the screws on social media companies, not because of a coup, but because their users insulted his finance minister's wife, who also happens to be Erdogan's daughter. It's a system that conveniently helps him jail people who compare him to Gollum from Lord of the Rings. But the Kurdish minority has gotten the brunt of Erdogan's rage. Almost 3,000 Kurdish political leaders have been jailed, and he's taken his campaign across borders. The Turkish military has occupied parts of northern Syria, where horrors followed. Erdogan's been accused of trying to remake the border, driving Kurds out in a campaign of ethnic cleansing. Reports indicate that when they're not being driven out, local women are being abused, kidnapped, forced into marriage, or murdered. Erdogan probably won't face any fallout for this. He made it illegal for the Grand National Assembly to investigate him. Erdogan says he's finally going to retire in May 2028, though if he does, it will almost certainly be on his own terms. Turkish insiders think his son-in-law, Selçuk Bayraktar, the godfather of Turkey's drone fleet, as a leading candidate. Suddenly, Hollywood's Nepo babies don't look so bad. Whoever takes charge, they're not likely to restore the institutions Erdogan gutted. And if Turkey looks shaky, Iran takes it a step further. Number 14, the Islamic Republic. Unlike Turkey, Iran was never a true democracy. It has elections, but they're more make-believe than meaningful. And this is why it's 147th on VDEM's list. So how do the elections work? Well, every political candidate has to be vetted from the unelected Guardian Council, an exclusive boys' club of Islamic legal experts. Half of its 12 members are hand-picked by the supreme leader. The other half? The legislature selects them from nominees put forward by the Chief Justice, who is chosen by the supreme leader. The council can then veto laws or even supervise elections. Unsurprisingly, reforms rarely make it past the concept stage. The one thing the council can't veto is the supreme leader himself, the only figure it ultimately answers to. The supreme leader can pretty much do whatever he wants once he's appointed by another body, the Assembly of Experts. Technically, the public elects this body every 8 years, but there are catches. They all have to be experts in Islamic jurisprudence. Nobody else should bother applying. And just to keep things tidy, all candidates must first be approved by the Guardian Council. All roads lead back to the supreme leader. That's currently this man, Ali Khamenei, who's been there longer than many of the people watching this video have been alive. He took control in 1989 and will stay there until he dies or retires. Khamenei presides over a theocratic regime that dishes out brutal sentences for crimes. The US State Department has a lot to say about it, though Iran usually just shrugs and says, "Watch this." If you're in Iran, having illegitimate relations with a woman who is not a relative can see you on the end of hundreds of lashings. Distribute unapproved music? 3 years in prison. All music, lyrics, and album covers must be approved by the Ministry of Culture to ensure Islamic moral values. Even Iran's own history can only be celebrated on official terms. This is the homeland of Cyrus the Great, founder of Persian civilization. But in October 2016, dozens of students were arrested for using norm-breaking and anti-values slogans at a birthday event in his honor. Some of them were sentenced to 8 years. Gender equality, forget it. Khamenei says it's a plot to corrupt the role of women in society. But at least he seems to practice what he preaches. Sure, he controlled assets worth $95 billion in 2013, but it's not like he's splurging. Instead, he's known for living a frugal lifestyle. Other leaders on this list don't even bother with the illusion. Number 13, the world's coolest dictatorship. 10 years ago, El Salvador was the murder capital of the world, with 103 homicides per 100,000 people. In 2024, it's the safest country in the Americas with 1.9. Way to go, El Sal! This comeback story rests on one man, President Nayib Bukele, aka the Philosopher King, aka the world's coolest dictator. Seriously, that's what he calls himself, supposedly to mock his critics. and he's got a lot of them. Making El Salvador safe came at a high cost. It's why Bukele is one of the two most controversial people on this list. El Salvador's enormous gang problem was Bukele's top priority when he first got elected in 2019. The results of his first few years were mixed. The homicide rate dropped from 36 to 7.8, which is pretty impressive, but there were reports that the president brokered a deal with the gangs to make that happen. That publication, El Faro, was promptly accused of money laundering and had to move to Costa Rica. It was a sign of things to come. Then came March 25th to 27th, 2022, the deadliest period in El Salvador's history since the Civil War. The gangs killed 62 people. Bukele responded mercilessly. He passed a state of exception to El Salvador's constitution. It suspended certain rights, including freedom of assembly, communications privacy, and time limits to detention. It was supposed to last 30 days. It's still going. Anti-gang measures followed. Bukele built enormous prisons, swept up anyone that even remotely looked like a gang member, and threw them in there without trial. El Salvador now imprisons more people per capita than any other country, with almost 1,700 prisoners per 100,000 people. Reports of abuse are rampant. The screams are supposedly constant as guards hit people day and night. Meanwhile, Bukele smiles for the cameras as El Salvador plays host to the likes of the Miss Universe pageant and the ISA World Surfing Games. But behind the tiaras and sashes, the walls keep closing in. Freedoms of movement and speech have shrunk, almost as fast as gang territories. Dissent means arrest. Critics face endless surveillance. Whole neighborhoods are like open-air prisons. In a country the size of Massachusetts, there's nowhere to hide. And Bukele has only tightened his grip since then. With his Nuevas Ideas party supermajority, the constitutional guardrails disappeared. Back-to-back terms once looked impossible, but not for Bukele. In late July 2025, they let him run again, and again, and again. Bukele remains highly popular in El Salvador. His re-election in 2024 by over 84% was considered free and fair, unlike so many others in this video. More than anyone else on this list, he lives up to his nicknames. But we've seen this story before. It's why El Salvador has sunk to 148 on VDEM's index, below even Iran. Opposition has been effectively flattened. Now Salvadorans can only hope Bukele turns out more like Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew and less like, say, the world's most infamous modern war criminal. Number 12. The modern Tsardom. Is anyone really surprised at this entry? Vladimir Putin has been the president or prime minister of Russia since 1999, longer than any Moscow leader since Joseph Stalin. In that time, the Russian Federation has slid to 159th on VDEM's list, and thanks to a new law, he could stay there until 2036. Don't be surprised if that changes, assuming he's still alive and kicking by then. Putin maintains his title as president of Russia with the help of elaborate stage-managed elections. Unlike some leaders on this list, he actually allows plenty of political parties. He even encourages them. The trick is that their competition splits the opposition vote. That leaves his United Russia party to dominate. And just in case, most of those parties have ties to him anyway, hidden somewhere in the fine print. Human rights issues in Russia are well known, so you might be more interested to hear about some of the more quirky things Putin does. He's created a cult of personality with feats of strength. He practices judo on camera and wrote a book about it. He's even got a black belt in it too. He once scuba dove and discovered 2 ancient Greek urns. He sedated an Amur tiger in the woods. He flew alongside endangered Siberian white cranes in a hang glider, guiding them to safety. He dove in a mini-sub off occupied Crimea to explore a shipwreck from the Byzantine Empire. Is all this true? Who knows? The judo, the urns, the tiger, the cranes may be real, maybe not, but I really hope the bird part at least is legit. But if you want more on Russia, check out my recent videos. No tigers or crane cameos though, promise. Now back to democracy, or at least what's left of it. Number 11. Mafia state. So far, Turkey's noped its way out of democracy, Iran's perfected the art of fake elections, and El Salvador's turned the whole country into a holding cell. Next up, a country where dictatorship is the family business. At number 161 on VDEM's list, the Republic of Azerbaijan has been run by President Ilham Aliyev since 2003. Before him, it was his father. In Baku, democracy isn't passed down. It's the presidency that is. Just look at Nagorno-Karabakh to see what he's all about. Ethnic Armenians had been living there for centuries. Today, there's very few. Over 100,000 of them rushed for the exits in the autumn of 2023, when Aliyev's forces came. Only a few dozen had the courage to remain. International human rights groups have described it as an ethnic cleansing. He might even have his eyes on Armenia itself. Aliyev said that the nation was only a territory artificially created on ancient Azerbaijani lands. Armenians in Azerbaijani territory have had it the worst, but no one really escapes. Azerbaijan's Shia Muslims live under constant surveillance, and since his victory in 2023, Aliyev has gotten worse. He's swept up opposition journalists and activists in a wave of arbitrary arrests. He says it's a way to prevent foreign influence in Azerbaijan. In reality, it's just his way of reminding everyone who signs their paychecks and who doesn't. Elections here are a sham. Aliyev used his victory in Nagorno-Karabakh to call for an early vote last year. Opposition parties said they wouldn't participate and urged voters to stay home. All critical voices to his regime had to stay silent. He won by over 92%. So what does Aliyev do with all this power? Well, he was the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project's 2012 Person of the Year. Apparently, there really is an award for everything. But that about sums it up. He's a mafia boss masquerading as a president. In 2017, word got out that he was at the center of a $2.9 billion money laundering scheme. The funds went through 4 UK companies. The people that got the money spent it on luxury goods and private schools for their children. And it worked. A critical vote from the Council of Europe on Azerbaijan's human rights record was successfully avoided. Azerbaijan's president seems fond of the UK. When the Pandora Papers came out in 2021, they showed that his 3 children and 2 close associates were involved in a sprawling network of 84 offshore companies. They owned London properties worth $700 million, and he and his family have stakes in most of the country's important industries. For them, Azerbaijan is a business. With European demand for energy sources outside Russia, they're likely about to get even richer. Number 10. The $15 million man. Aliyev might be a presidential don, but he doesn't have a $15 million bounty on his head. This one does. Welcome to Nicolas Maduro's Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, ranked 168th on VDEM's list. Like many stories of non-democratic countries, this one also begins with an election. Venezuela was in chaos in the 1980s and 1990s. So Hugo Chavez was elected as president of Venezuela in 1998 and began the Bolivarian Revolution. The country soon became dominated by a single party, the United Socialist Party of Venezuela. Chavez died in office in 2013. During his tenure, Venezuela went from being one of the richest countries in Latin America to one of the poorest. That's continued under his successor. Under Maduro, ordinary Venezuelans have gotten a lot poorer. Just 3 years into his rule, almost 16% of them were resorting to eating food waste. Meanwhile, Maduro is probably living big off of narcotics trafficking. 2 of his wife's nephews have been convicted of bringing cocaine into the United States. That was in 2016. 4 years later, Maduro himself was indicted for conspiring with Colombia's FARC militants. Basically, he's accused of letting a designated terror group traffic narcotics into the United States through Venezuelan airspace. So there's a $15 million reward for his arrest. Maduro can do that because he stays in power through brazen force. The Carter Center was monitoring Venezuela's 2024 election. Surprisingly, there were little reports about intimidation at polling places to pressure voters like in Egypt. The Maduro regime's censorship and restrictions on political activity left the election's legitimacy in doubt, long before the National Election Council decided not to bother with results by polling stations. In the end, the regime just announced Maduro as the winner. Deal with it. Maduro certainly did. He followed up with Operation Tuntun to crack down on dissent that popped up in the aftermath, a name that sounds friendlier than the crackdown it delivered. His opponents had to flee to the Dutch and Spanish embassies to apply for asylum and is now living in exile in Spain. Whoever has the bravery to challenge Maduro again in 2030 probably should make similar plans. Number 9. the motherland of neutrality. Welcome to the delightfully named Motherland of Neutrality, Turkmenistan, ranked 174th on the Liberal Democracy Index. It gained independence from Soviet rule in 1991, but not from Soviet leaders. Saparmurat Niyazov, the communist bigwig at the time, took over and implemented a personality cult more elaborate than anything on this list so far. He was called the father of all Turkmen. He put up golden statues of himself as the economy struggled. He renamed cities after himself and his family members. He renamed the months of the year. He closed libraries because he said the average Turkmen don't read. Doctors in the country swore loyalty to him rather than the Hippocratic Oath, even as he closed all the hospitals outside the capital. Then he died in 2006. He didn't become an eternal president, though. The current president is Serdar Berdimuhamedov, who took power in 2022. Took power are the key words here. His predecessor was his father, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, who took over after Niyazov's death. When he said it was time for a younger leader, he simply pulled an Azerbaijan, handing the country straight to his son. The election he organized was a show of 9. His son and 8 other candidates loyal to him. The son won with 73% of the vote. There were no debates, and Serdar's few public appearances were all heavily scripted. A snap of the fingers, a few magic words, and presto, you have a president. But Berdimuhamedov, the father, wasn't going away. He was quickly appointed chairman of the People's Council of Turkmenistan, a body he created in 2021 by his grateful son. It can change the constitution and give out guidelines for domestic and foreign policy. It also helps that he is now officially the national leader of the Turkmen people, so he and his family have legal immunity. Basically, Turkmenistan is now a father-son co-regency. Maybe Lukashenko is taking notes. The dynasty has at least abolished some of the more eccentric parts of Niyazov's personality cult. The calendar was changed back, and libraries and hospitals were reopened, sure, but some golden statues of Niyazov were just replaced with Gurbanguly's. Human rights and Turkmenistan don't go well together either. Baloch and Uzbek ethnic minorities are forbidden from teaching their language and customs. Religious minorities are accused of inciting hatred, imprisoned, and tortured. Internet access is heavily censored. For one thing, you can't watch this video if you're in Turkmenistan. Number 8. Modern Kingdom, Old Oppression. Most non-democratic countries at least try to look democratic. That's not so in Saudi Arabia, ranked 169th on VDEM's list. It's a throwback to what was supposed to be a bygone era, an absolute monarchy. The king, currently Salman, rules with complete authority. There is a prime minister of Saudi Arabia, but the PM is usually the king or crown prince. King Salman doesn't do the day-to-day business of governing the kingdom. He is 89 years old. He should be thinking about kicking back somewhere oppressive and full of sand, but enough about Florida. Salman has made a tremendously important decision for the kingdom's future. In 2017, he broke with tradition and appointed his son the crown prince. This man, Mohammed bin Salman, frequently just called MBS, has been the effective ruler of Saudi Arabia since then. In 2022, his role was formalized when he became PM, and he might just be the most controversial figure in this video. Putin and Maduro are like comic book bad guys. They're evil, and you know it. MBS is a more complex character. Shortly after taking over, he complained that if it hadn't been for America's influence, Saudi Arabia would have ended up like North Korea. And it's true that before him, Saudi Arabia was more like Afghanistan than America. Daily life was highly controlled by religious authorities that had enormous power. In one shocking incident back in 2002, they were accused of hindering rescue attempts during a fire at a girls' school because the girls weren't wearing abayas. 15 died. That has changed. MBS stripped the religious police of most of their powers. With them out of the picture, he opened up the entertainment and cultural sectors in Saudi Arabia. It's become almost a literal mecca for big sporting events. Men and women can go out together freely now. In just a decade, MBS has made Saudi Arabia look more like a modern Western-style country. But democracy? Not here. MBS leads a particularly brutal authoritarian regime. Jamal Khashoggi's was only the most infamous act. Things have worsened since. Critics are rounded up, tortured, and killed. Over 21,000 workers have died building his Vision 2030 program. MBS also hasn't completely done away with the guardianship system. Women's rights activists who want it gone have also been rounded up. MBS says he has to do it to implement his reforms. That's what they all say. I don't know about you, but to me, this one's pretty wild. Saudi Arabia's actually managed to get more authoritarian under MBS. Now it's just dressed up for the 21st century instead of the Middle Ages. Does the upgrade make it better or worse? Drop your take in the comments. Number 7. Europe's last dictatorship. Alexander Lukashenko has been the president of the Republic of Belarus since 1994, the only free and fair election he ever took part in, and that's part of the reason it's ranked 172nd on the VDEM's list. Notice I said part. Lukashenko's efforts to rig the vote and suppress dissent got so bad in 2020 that the US, UK, and EU no longer recognize him as the legitimate Belarusian president. But he's still there. In January 2025, he won yet another 6-year term, this time without protests because exiled political opponents knew they would be too dangerous. Lukashenko was threatened once. In 1996, during his first term, he was impeached for violating the Belarusian constitution. His solution was simple. He rewrote it in a sham referendum. The presidency gained sweeping powers. Parliament turned into a hand-picked rubber stamp. The security forces silenced dissent, and the rest, as they say, is history. Europe's so-called last dictator once had mighty ambitions. Russia was in chaos in the 1990s, and Lukashenko was an early champion of unification. Russia's fledgling liberals got nervous that he'd make a play for the Kremlin, but Putin put the kibosh on that. That hasn't stopped the Belarusian president from cracking down on the Belarusian language itself. He dismisses it as second-rate. His preference? Russian, of course. Belarusians who speak it in public are asking to be seen as enemies of the regime. If they display cultural symbols like Belarus' red and white flag, they definitely will be. Today, only 25% of Belarusians speak their own language in daily life. Lukashenko once sold himself as a man of the Belarusian people, a humble farmer who represented a way out of the former communist establishment. He likes to keep that image by playing sports, especially ice hockey, even now at age 70. But when you're a 70-year-old dictator, you think about the future, and in Lukashenko's case, that future might be like Azerbaijan's. Lukashenko's third son, Nikolai, has been on important business with him since he was a little boy. He was raised solely by his father. It isn't even certain who his mother is, though it's been reported it's Lukashenko's personal doctor, Irina. Lukashenko denies the idea, since the constitution says the president needs to be at least 35. Nikolai is only 20 now, so Lukashenko would need to last to 85 by then. But who takes that seriously here? Number 6. Surveillance Central. The dictatorships we've looked at so far are so openly corrupt that you can almost laugh at them if you're in a safe place. That's not so in the People's Republic of China. There were once high hopes here, but when Xi Jinping became China's leader in 2012, they disappeared quickly. Xi goes by several wordy titles to describe his position. General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, Chairman of the Central Military Commission, and President of China are the most important. Since his time in charge, he's turned China into the world's most sophisticated authoritarian state, which ranks it 173rd on VDEM's index. You know about the oppression of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, the Great Firewall that blocks off access to the foreign internet, and the social credit system, but there are other things less known, but arguably more chilling. Chinese citizens have much greater access to technology than their counterparts in other countries on this list, but that's the point. It lets the Communist Party know what they're thinking. Complain about a traffic ticket on WeChat, get locked up for 5 days, even if it's deleted. People smart enough to keep their feelings to themselves are still being watched. There are 370 security cameras in China per 1,000 people. The next closest place in the world? Indore, India. It has 62.5. And they're not just any security cameras. They're linked to a vast data network powered by artificial intelligence to aggregate facial recognition and even DNA information. One slip, and the cameras in China will know exactly who you are, down to your gait, your face, and probably your mood. What makes it chilling isn't just the precision, but the fact the same technology is sitting in democratic countries too. Their governments are already using it, only they insist it's for your convenience. It's ironic, because Xi himself was once a political prisoner. His father was purged during Mao's Cultural Revolution, and he wound up digging ditches for a while in a labor camp. So how does Xi make his decisions that affirm the system that once victimized him? Few people know. Although he's a highly public figure, his leadership style more closely resembles his counterpart in Afghanistan. Xi's speeches usually take place behind closed doors and don't get released for months. He's reportedly a micromanager, but with vague orders, which means lower-level figures get to take the fall if things go bad. And they have to keep coming back to him, which means power is centralized in himself. There is a similarity with a certain other dictatorship, though. Ordinary Chinese people can get in trouble for watching certain Hollywood films. Not him, though. He's a fan. Saving Private Ryan is reportedly one of his favorites. But hey, at least Xi hasn't spent millions China doesn't have on golden statues of himself. Yet. That's not the case in a landlocked country to the west. Number 5. Spousal privilege. One country stands out in the New World as particularly non-democratic. It's headed not by a father-son dynasty, but by a husband and wife partnership. It's the Republic of Nicaragua, ranked 175th on VDEM's list. Daniel Ortega first grabbed power as head of Nicaragua's ruling junta. He served as president from 1985 to 1990 until he lost in a rare, free, and fair election. He tried again in 96, lost. Tried again in 2001, lost. The third time in 2006, that was the charm. But not for democracy. Ortega was back, and he wasn't leaving. In 2011, he ran again, this time blocking international poll observers from key polling places. And he was just getting started. In 2014, his allies scrapped presidential term limits. He's been re-elected ever since. When protests erupted in 2018, he crushed them with violence. Observers from the Organization for American States were expelled, but not before they found that Ortega's enforcers were using rubber bullets and tear gas. Then they moved to military-grade assault rifles and even grenade launchers. Doctors who treated the wounded were fired, leaving the true casualty count unknown. In 2021, Ortega followed the crackdown by arresting dozens of opposition leaders. There was an election that year. He won with 76% of the vote. His rule now feels like something out of Roman times. Even the Catholic Church isn't safe. Bishop Rolando Jose Alvarez Lagos of Matagalpa was put under house arrest. He was eventually exiled to Vatican City. Others haven't been so lucky. But Ortega is getting old. He'll be 80 in a few months. Succession is on the table. He's got 8 children to choose from, but one daughter accused him of abuse in a documentary, so trusting the family isn't exactly his strong suit. Instead, he made his wife, Rosario Murillo, co-president. She's already been vice president since 2017, so it was less a surprise and more a coronation. Time will tell if Nicaragua emerges from the dictatorship when Ortega finally gives up the ghost, but for now, it's the least democratic country in the Americas, even more than Venezuela. And Ortega's not alone. There are plenty more names coming. Some you've heard of, some you probably haven't. Stick around, because the worst of the worst is still to come. Number 4. The Emir of Mystery. No country has had more democratic backsliding in such a short amount of time than Afghanistan. VDEM ranks it number 176th, the 4th worst in the world. The Taliban retook control in a lightning offensive 4 years ago and haven't looked back. Most countries don't recognize the Taliban's Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. The current supreme leader is this man, Hibatullah Akhundzada. He's been the leader of the Taliban since May 25, 2016, when his predecessor was killed in an American drone strike. Akhundzada has survived at least 3 assassination attempts. He's resilient, if nothing else. But those attempts are probably why he doesn't ever appear in public. Even the lone photo that people think is his might not be. And from his hidden sanctum, he writes words that are law. There's no legislature, no elections, no courts to check his commands. Here's what is known. The Taliban's dismal human rights record needs no explaining, and he intends to keep it that way. In 2022, he said he would rather see Afghanistan suffer a nuclear strike rather than take any step that is against Islam or Sharia. Seems a bit extreme. Women have the worst of it, but the men of Afghanistan are also subject to some harsh restrictions. They're required to cover their faces with long beards. Men are also now forbidden from playing chess. The supreme leader thinks it promotes gambling. But Akhundzada may be less secure than other leaders on this list. Even inside the Taliban, his one-man rule is grating. Deputy Sirajuddin Haqqani went on camera to scold him for hoarding power. Another deputy, Abdul Salam Hanafi, even pushed for girls to return to school. When Taliban deputies sound like moderates, you know how far things have gone. The group promised not to repeat the 1990s, but here we are. Afghanistan may sit on vast mineral wealth, but the regime won't touch it. Neighbors like Pakistan and Iran worry about refugees and instability spilling over. The rest of the world, they'd rather look away. And somehow, there are still 3 countries worse, where chaos rules or resistance doesn't stand a chance. Number 3. Shattered miracle. It took foreign intervention to first bring something like democracy to Afghanistan, but in Myanmar, it looked like a miracle could happen on its own. It was under military rule from 1962 to 2011, but under the weight of crippling sanctions, it began to democratize in the 2010s. The opposition leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, won a historic election in 2015 by a landslide. But the military still retained a lot of power and didn't like what it was seeing. When she won again in 2020, the military had enough. It launched a coup in early 2021, and now the country's leader is this man, Min Aung Hlaing. Officially, he's the chairman of the State Security and Peace Commission of the Republic of the Union of Myanmar. It's a nice Orwellian name, because it's just a military junta in the end, and it's ranked 177th on VDEM's list. The public in Myanmar strongly opposed the coup and took to the streets. Hlaing ordered a lethal response, and the country's been back in civil war ever since. Nothing has been off-limits for Hlaing since. He's ordered airstrikes on civilians. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against him for his role in crimes against humanity on the country's Rohingya minority. Over 1 million of them have been driven out. Meanwhile, Aung San Suu Kyi has to serve 27 years out of a 33-year prison sentence for supposed corruption. And he's getting rich while the country stays in chaos. As head of the military, he helps himself to military-owned properties, sometimes for residence, sometimes for business. His family just happens to own the largest share in a luxury condo conveniently next to the military's Parami bus terminal in Yangon's South Okalapa township. Meanwhile, his 2 children run a sprawling business empire. It's neatly sliced into enough subdivisions that one of their companies is always the lucky winner of an exclusive contract. Funny how that works out. And all while around 82,000 people have been killed, with at least 3.2 million displaced since the civil war began. To him, it's just the price of doing business. But there's some hope for Myanmar's suffering people. Hlaing's junta has lost ground in the last couple of years. Maybe one day he'll need to make his business deals in exile. That's almost certainly never going to be the case here. You've probably been waiting for it, and at last, we've arrived in the Hermit Kingdom. Number 2. North Korea. Officially, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is the standard when it comes to measuring how bad a dictatorship can get. It's ranked 178th on VDEM's list, partially because of how experienced its regime is at being non-democratic. Kim Jong-un is the 3rd-generation dictator here, and he has a lot of titles to prove it. We can't even begin to list them all, but the most important ones are General Secretary of the Workers' Party of Korea and Chairman of the Central Military Commission of the Workers' Party of Korea. Then there's President of the State Affairs of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. That's a mouthful, ain't it? You already know how bad the human rights situation is in North Korea, so we don't need to repeat the general details. We're gonna talk about some of the more absurd things you might not know. Remember when Dennis Rodman sang Happy Birthday to Kim Jong-un back in 2014? He didn't say, "Dear Kim," he said, "Dear Marshall." That's because people must call him by an acceptable title whenever they refer to him, even indirectly, and that's one of them. Others, at least once, included Supreme Leader or Dear Respected. More recently, younger North Koreans have a new title they must refer to him by, Respected Father. But simply calling Kim Jong-un by a title isn't enough. Have you ever seen those pins bearing the faces of Kim's father and grandfather on them? North Koreans have to wear them, and they also have to not call them pins because that's considered too humble. Badge is the correct term. Technically, North Korea has elections, which is why it's 178th. They have close to 100% turnout too, but they're not for Kim. They're for the show legislature called the Supreme People's Assembly. The people are expected to show up early, receive a paper with a single name on it, and put it in the ballot box. Then they join the cheering groups on the street when they're done, showing how happy they were to vote for such wise leadership. Sure, there's a private voting booth, but using it is basically an admission of guilt. Technically, you can cross the single name off the ballot too, but that usually comes with a police visit and an official diagnosis of insanity. Elections aren't elections here. They're loyalty tests. Fail and you pay the price, and so does your family. And finally, number 1, the least democratic country. If you consult the VDEM index, you'll find one country with the overall lowest score at 179th. Welcome to the state of Eritrea. It gained its formal independence from Ethiopia in 1993 after a 30-year war. And what happens in wars of independence? The winning leader usually takes over. That would be this man, President Isaias Afwerki. He's been the country's leader since 1993, but there's a catch. As you've seen, other dictatorships have pretend elections to at least make it look like they're democracies, even North Korea. It helps them in the international propaganda war. Eritrea doesn't bother. There was an election scheduled once, for 2001. It still hasn't happened. There was a border war with Ethiopia between 1998 and 2000 that seems to have left a permanent mark on Afwerki. He abruptly turned totalitarian and shut down all dissent. Afwerki presides over an Eritrea that has one of the worst human rights records in the world, if not the single worst. A UN report mentioned that over 400,000 people in the country had been forced into labor in the army or bureaucracy. There's no domestic media to report any of this. It's all run by the state. Reporters Without Borders ranks it 180th out of 180 countries in terms of press freedom, a spot lower than North Korea. This little country with a population between 3.5 and 6.4 million people, no one really knows, Eritrea doesn't do censuses, sent more journalists to prison than any other country. Well, except for Turkey, China, and Egypt. But not all prisons are the same. If you think El Salvador's prisons were bad, they can't even compare to here. Prisoners in Eritrea are held in remote, underground facilities where they're shoved into metal containers that double as ovens in the Horn of Africa heat. Arbitrary arrests are routine, especially since there's money to be made in denouncing someone. And, as in North Korea, families of dissidents share the punishment. In Eritrea, guilt may not be inherited, but the bill certainly is. And also, like in North Korea, Eritrea's people live in extreme poverty. Only 5.6% of them even had a cell phone in 2018. The last IMF report about its GDP said it was about $2 billion total. GDP per capita, about $580 a year. Ironically, Afwerki's party is called the People's Front for Democracy and Justice. It's not going anywhere soon, because it's the only legal party. Foreign intervention? Most foreigners probably don't even know their country exists. Even North Koreans have at least that much. So, there you have it. The 15 worst places for democracy. Which one shocked you the most? Or are they all competing for last place? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. Really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack. Imagine a world where islands appear and disappear, where continents are distorted beyond recognition, and where entire cities are just conjured out of thin air. Today, we're going to take a look at 50 maps that lied to you, and you didn't even notice. Number 50. The Mercator projection. If we want to talk about cartographic distortion, we have to start with the Mercator projection. Created by Flemish explorer Gerardus Mercator in 1569, it is the most widely used map projection in the world, but it's also one of the most deceptive. While it was originally designed for navigation, preserving angles and directions to allow sailors to chart straight-line courses, it distorts the size of land masses as one moves away from the equator. For example, Alaska looks as large as Brazil, though Brazil is nearly 5 times bigger. The distortion is caused by the projection's increasing scale with latitude, making regions near the poles appear much larger than they actually are. Number 49. The Peters projection controversy. In 1972, German historian Arno Peters unveiled a new world map projection that sparked intense debate. Peters claimed his projection was more accurate than Mercator's in representing land areas, particularly those of developing nations. The Peters projection, a so-called equal area map, preserves the relative sizes of continents and countries. This means that Africa and South America appear much larger compared to their representation on the Mercator projection, while areas like Greenland and Antarctica appear smaller. Peters argued that this representation was fairer and less Eurocentric, as it gave proper visual weight to regions often marginalized on traditional maps. However, while the Peters projection accurately represents land areas, it significantly distorts the shapes of continents and countries. This distortion is particularly noticeable near the poles and along the equator, where land masses appear stretched or compressed. As a result, despite being politically neutral, the Peters projection is far less suitable for navigation and other practical applications that require accurate shape representation. Number 48. The China-India border dispute. When talking about distorted maps, politics is often key. For example, maps of border regions such as the Chinese-Indian border often differ significantly depending on their country of origin. This reflects the ongoing territorial disputes which started with the 1962 Sino-Indian War. These cartographic discrepancies highlight how maps serve as powerful tools for asserting political claims and shaping national narratives, something you'll surely see again on our list. Many of these disputes can be traced back to colonial-era border agreements, such as the 1914 McMahon Line, which China has never accepted. This conflict underscores the complex historical, political, and cultural factors that continue to influence maps of this region. Fact number 47. The Great Lakes distortion. Just as with land masses, many world maps also significantly underrepresent the size of lakes. Nowhere is this more true than North America's Great Lakes. These bodies, which contain an astonishing 21% of the world's surface freshwater, often appear as little more than small dots on world maps, leading to underestimations of their importance. The reality is that the Great Lakes are crucial for both the US and Canada, and throughout the country's histories have supported extensive shipping and fishing industries. Number 46. The omission of South Sudan. While some political map distortions are centuries old, others are more recent. When the nation of South Sudan gained independence in 2011, many maps were slow to update, continuing to show it as part of Sudan. This lag in cartographic updates highlights how maps can perpetuate outdated geopolitical realities, as the delay in recognizing South Sudan on maps reflected broader challenges with international recognition and diplomatic relations. Number 45. The misleading Arctic ice cap. Cartographic distortions are also present in places where nobody lives. Many maps depict the Arctic ice cap as a permanent, solid landmass. But in reality, the Arctic ice is constantly changing, melting, and refreezing. This failure to represent its nearly constant changes has led to numerous misconceptions about areas like climate change and Arctic navigation. The shifting nature of Arctic ice is important for global climate models and maritime routes, especially as the warming of Earth accelerates the melting process. Number 44. The distortion of Greenland. We can't emphasize enough how dramatically the Mercator projection distorts Greenland. To put it in perspective, on Mercator projection maps, Greenland appears to rival the size of Africa, when in reality, Africa is about 14 times larger. The visual impact of this distortion should serve us all as a powerful reminder of the need for critical interpretation of maps. Number 43. The exaggeration of Europe. European-made world maps, like the Mercator projection, have, as you would guess, tended to place Europe at the center and subtly, or not so subtly, exaggerate its size. This practice of Eurocentrism has widely influenced global perceptions of the continent for centuries. This placement of Europe at the center of maps reflects its historical dominance in both exploration and cartography. It's led to misconceptions about Europe's relative size and importance compared to other continents. In no small part, this was both driven by and contributed to colonial narratives about the inferiority of non-European peoples and countries. Number 42. The misplacement of Hawaii. Many world maps place Hawaii in an inset box, often positioned much closer to North America than its true location. This practice, while convenient for map layout, can lead to misconceptions about Hawaii's actual position in the Pacific Ocean. Many tourists who fly to the islands for the first time are shocked by the actual length of the trip, which takes close to 6 hours on a nonstop flight from Los Angeles, nearly the same amount of time it takes to fly from New York City to London. Number 41. The shrinking of India. One of the most striking casualties of the Mercator map shrinkage is the country and subcontinent of India. This visual diminishment can have far-reaching consequences, potentially influencing perceptions of India's global significance, economic potential, and geopolitical weight. In reality, India covers an immense area of over 1.2 million square miles, making it the 7th largest country by land area. An accurate representation of India's size is important for understanding its extreme biodiversity, varied climate zones, and the sheer scale of its demographic and economic impact on the world stage. We've gotten through 10. If you thought those were interesting, we're just getting started. Fact number 40. The Phantom Lake Shammai. Beyond distortions of size and importance, there's also a long history of maps creating geographies that don't exist at all. In one prominent example of this, 16th and 17th century maps of Southeast Asia often featured a huge inland lake called Shammai in the region of modern-day Thailand and Laos. This non-existent lake, based on misinterpretations of local reports from early Portuguese travelers and traders, influenced European understanding of the region's geography for centuries. The myth of Lake Shammai reflects how cartographic errors fueled by incomplete or inaccurate information often persist over time and shape world events. European powers relied on these flawed maps when making decisions about trade and colonization, leading to a number of misguided expeditions and strategic miscalculations. Number 39. The straight line border myth. Our next cartographic distortion has to do with borders, and the fact that many maps depict them as straight lines. In reality, these borders are often far more complex, following natural features or reflecting local agreements not captured in simplified map representations. The US-Canada border provides a striking example of this phenomenon. While often portrayed as a straight line along the 49th parallel, it actually deviates significantly in several places. The border weaves through the Great Lakes, heads southward to include Point Roberts, Washington, and zigzags through the Strait of Juan de Fuca. These irregularities reflect historical negotiations, geographical features, and local needs that are often overlooked in simplified map depictions. Number 38. The isolation of New Zealand. Much like Hawaii, due to space constraints, many maps separate New Zealand and place it in an inset. This practice, while practical, can create misconceptions about New Zealand's size and position. In reality, New Zealand is remarkably isolated. It lies approximately 930 miles east of Australia, nearly 1,500 miles south of New Caledonia, and around 1,600 miles southwest of Fiji. Meanwhile, Antarctica is about 3,100 miles away. This extreme isolation has had many implications for New Zealand's cultural identity, their biodiversity, and their economic relationships. Many of the country's unique flora and fauna evolved in isolation, while its economy relies heavily on long-distance trade. Understanding New Zealand's true geographic context is crucial for appreciating its distinct place in the world. Number 37. The misplacement of the equator. Another Mercator projection distortion has to do with the equator. Some world maps, particularly those designed for classroom use, slightly misplace the equator. This is to better fit South America on a single page. This subtle distortion is generally accepted as necessary by cartographers, geographers, climate scientists, and others, as the equator is a crucial reference point for understanding global patterns. Number 36. The mythical island of Hebrazel. For centuries, European maps featured the mythical island of Hebrazel off Ireland's west coast. This phantom island, deeply rooted in Celtic folklore, persisted on cartographic records until 1873, influencing maritime exploration in the North Atlantic. Hebrazel was often depicted as a huge circular island with a river running through its center, and its legend serves as a compelling example of the intersection between cultural mythology and cartography. It highlights how imaginary lands can gain a semblance of reality through their repeated inclusion in supposedly factual maps. Number 35. The distortion of Antarctica. The Mercator projection's distortion doesn't just affect the North. Like Greenland, it also greatly exaggerates Antarctica's size. On these maps, Antarctica appears as an endlessly long strip stretching across the entire bottom of the map, rather than its true, more circular shape. This distortion has implications for understanding Antarctica's role in global climate systems, as people tend to view it as an endless and unchanging field of ice, rather than a vulnerable and quickly shrinking biosphere. Number 34. The Flat Earth Myth. In other cases, some cartographic errors themselves have been made up. Contrary to popular belief, medieval European cartographers did not widely believe or depict the Earth as flat. This misconception, popularized by 19th century writers, has led to widespread misunderstandings about historical geographical knowledge. In fact, the spherical nature of Earth was well established among educated Europeans since ancient Greek times. But the persistence of the flat Earth myth in popular culture reflects a misinterpretation of medieval worldviews and scientific understanding. Number 33. The misplacement of the prime meridian. The prime meridian, which defines 0 degrees longitude, wasn't standardized until 1884, running through the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, London. The decision was largely based on the fact that by that time, 72% of the world's commerce already used charts which used Greenwich as the prime meridian. Before then, different countries used different prime meridians, leading to wide discrepancies between maps and vastly complicating international navigation. The standardization of the prime meridian was a crucial step in modernizing global cartography. Number 32. The Vinland Map Hoax. The Vinland Map, supposedly a 15th century map showing Norse exploration of North America, was officially revealed in 2021 to be a 20th century forgery. This elaborate hoax had fooled experts for decades and sparked numerous debates about pre-Columbian transatlantic contact. Now that it's been conclusively determined to be a fake, the Vinland Map controversy highlights the challenges of verifying historical cartographic artifacts. Fact number 31. The fake town of Argleton. Many other cartographic deceptions are also modern in origin. In 2009, it was discovered that Google Maps included a non-existent town called Argleton in Lancashire, England. This so-called trap street on a digital platform demonstrates how copyright protection techniques have evolved for the digital age. Mapmakers intentionally create these fictional entities to detect unauthorized copying of their work. Argleton's brief existence and subsequent removal show us that even advanced digital mapping systems are not immune to errors. Fact number 30. The distortion of Russia. Like Greenland and Alaska, the Mercator projection significantly exaggerates the size of Russia, making it appear much larger relative to other countries. While Russia is indeed the largest country by land area, this distortion has led to overestimations of its size. And there's also a historical context. For centuries, Russians have been keenly aware, even fearful, of potential land invasions due to their relatively flat and open geography, particularly from the west. The Mercator's exaggerated size has helped validate these historical anxieties, reinforcing a national narrative centered on defensibility and the need for a strong military. While the distortion misrepresents relative sizes, it also strongly aligns a sense of geopolitical vulnerability in Russian collective memory. Number 29. The mythical island of Thule. Perhaps unsurprisingly, our next distortion is another fake but fabled island. Ancient Greek and Roman maps often included the island of Thule, described as the northernmost point of the world. Its exact location varied widely on different maps, showcasing how mythical places can become cartographic realities. Much like Mount Olympus, the legend of Thule reflects the ancient Greeks' fascination with the unknown. Number 28. The misplacement of Japan. Early European maps of Asia often placed Japan much farther east than its actual location, sometimes even positioning it directly across from California. This error, based on bad interpretations of early explorer Marco Polo's accounts, influenced exploration and trade for centuries. Japan's correct placement on maps would later become crucial for Europeans establishing accurate trade routes. Number 27. The Strait of Malacca elongation. Another cartographic error by the first European explorers greatly exaggerated the length of the Strait of Malacca between Malaysia and Indonesia. This distortion, based on misunderstandings of local navigational practices, again persisted for centuries and influenced spice trade routes. Number 26. The distortion of Africa. If you thought the shrinking of India was severe, the distortion is even worse for the continent of Africa. In all Mercator projection maps, the African continent appears much, much smaller than it actually is, leading to widespread misconceptions about the continent's true size, which covers approximately 11.7 million square miles. For perspective, Africa is so large that you could fit the US, China, and India inside its borders with room to spare. So, we're halfway through our list of cartographic lies. If you thought the last 25 were cool, you're gonna love what's coming next. Number 25. The island of Atlantis. The most famous fake island on our list is undoubtedly Atlantis. This legendary island has appeared on numerous maps throughout history, despite no evidence of its existence ever surfacing. Its location has varied wildly, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. Constantly referenced in both literature and modern popular culture, the myth of Atlantis remains one of the most prominent examples of how fake places can capture our imaginations. Number 24. El Dorado. El Dorado, the legendary city of gold, was included on numerous European maps from the 16th to 19th centuries, fueled by conquistadors' tales of a gilded king and a city of treasure. The legend proved irresistible, despite the lack of any verifiable evidence from exploration. Lake Parime, the supposed location of El Dorado in the Guyana highlands, became a common cartographic feature, reflecting not geographical accuracy, but rather European desires and the lure of untold riches. The mythical city fueled countless fruitless expeditions and shaped European perceptions of South America. Number 23. The Admiral Fonte Expedition. In the 18th century, several maps included the supposed discoveries of Admiral Bartolomeo de Fonte in the Pacific Northwest. But Admiral Fonte himself never existed. His fictional explorations, invented by a London publisher to drum up hype for expeditions, were accepted as fact and influenced cartography for years. Number 22. The Great Wall of China myth. Contrary to popular belief, the Great Wall of China is not visible from space with the naked eye. This myth, perpetuated by many maps and globes, was debunked by Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei in 2003, but it hasn't stopped people from repeating the tale to this day. Number 21. Sandy Island returns. Sandy Island, sometimes labeled in French as Île des Sables or Isla Arenosa in Spanish, is yet another phantom island. For over a century, it was supposedly located near the French territory of New Caledonia. The island was included on thousands of maps and nautical charts from as early as the late 19th century onwards. While it was removed from French maps in 1974, the island gained wide media and public attention for remaining on Google Maps in November of 2012, when an Australian research ship passed through the area and undiscovered it. The island was quickly removed from maps and datasets, including those of the National Geographic Society and Google Maps. Number 20. The Island of Bermeja. The ghost island of Bermeja was supposedly located in the Gulf of Mexico, and it appeared on maps for centuries. In 2009, a Mexican research vessel went searching in the hope that it was out there, but failed to find any trace of the island, concluding that it never existed. Its disappearance also had implications for international maritime boundaries and oil rights in the region. Number 19. The Kingdom of Prester John. Medieval and Renaissance maps frequently included the legendary Christian kingdom of Prester John, a powerful and virtuous ruler believed to be located somewhere in the east, either in Asia or Africa. This entirely fictional realm fueled European hopes of a strong Christian ally in their wars against Islam, influencing exploration and diplomacy for hundreds of years. Explorers were dispatched to locate this mythical kingdom, and diplomats sought to establish contact, wasting huge amounts of time and money. Number 18. The Strait of Anian. Another piece of European speculation was the Strait of Anian. This semi-mythical strait, documented from around 1560, was believed by early modern cartographers to mark the boundary between North America and Asia. It was supposed to allow access to a northwest passage from the Arctic Ocean to the Pacific. The true strait was discovered in 1728, which today we know as the Bering Strait. The Strait of Anian had been generally placed nearby, but sometimes appeared as far south as California. Number 17. The Fake Islands of Lake Superior. In the grand old tradition of including fake islands, early maps of North America's Great Lakes included several non-existent landmasses in Lake Superior. These ghost islands, such as Isle Philippot and Isle Pontchartrain, appeared on maps well into the 19th century and proved to be a point of contention in territorial negotiations between the United States and Britain. Number 16. The Sea of the West. Just like Europe's habit of inventing lakes, 18th century maps of North America often featured a massive, imaginary inland sea in the American West, sometimes labeled Sea of the West or Mer de l'Ouest. Believed to be connected to the Pacific Ocean, this mythical body of water lingered on maps for decades. It wasn't until explorers and settlers pushed westward during U.S. expansion that the truth became clear. The sea never existed. Number 15. Terra Australis, the Great Southern Continent. European maps from antiquity featured a massive southern continent called Terra Australis, believed to balance the landmasses of the northern hemisphere. This hypothetical continent appeared on maps between the 15th and 18th centuries, well before the actual discovery of Antarctica. It fueled exploration and influenced geographical theories, driving voyages in search of its shores. Cartographers also used their artistic license to fill the unknown with imaginative coastlines and features. Number 14. The Mountains of the Moon. People of the ancient world, especially ancient Greek geographers, were long curious about the source of the Nile River in Egypt. A merchant named Diogenes reported that he had traveled inland in East Africa for 25 days and had found the source of the Nile. He reported that it flowed from a group of massive mountains, named the Mountains of the Moon because of their white, snow-capped peaks. These reports were accepted as true by most Greek and Roman geographers, most notably by Ptolemy, who produced maps that indicated the reported location of the mountains. Later, Arab geographers, despite having far more knowledge of Africa, also presumed the report was fact and included them in the same location. Centuries later, Scottish explorer James Bruce would undertake an expedition in search of the mountains, determining that they were most likely the mountains of modern-day Godjam, Ethiopia. Number 13. Aglo, New York, the paper town that became real. In the 1930s, mapmakers created the fictional town of Aglo, New York, as a clever copyright trap designed to catch anyone copying their maps without permission. But in a strange twist, Aglo took on a life of its own. By the 1950s, a business called Aglo Lodge Farms was established in the area, naming itself after the fake town. Aglo continued to appear on maps well into the 1990s, and even made a brief cameo on Google Maps. In 2014, the United States Geological Survey acknowledged its quirky legacy by adding Aglo, not official, to its geographic names information system. The town has continued to be a favorite fun fact for New Yorkers everywhere. Number 12. The Island of California. One of the most famous cartographic errors in history was the depiction of California as a large island, completely detached from continental North America. This misconception wasn't a fleeting mistake either. It stubbornly persisted on maps for nearly 2 centuries, from the early 17th to the mid-18th century. Even as explorers and cartographers gathered evidence proving California's connection to the mainland, the island myth endured in the popular imagination and on printed maps. Number 11. The Northwest Passage myth. Much like the Strait of Anian, many historical maps prominently displayed a navigable sea route through North America, the fabled Northwest Passage. This mythical shortcut fueled dozens of expeditions throughout the years, some of them deadly, and appeared on maps long before its actual discovery. These early representations spurred dreams of easier trade routes to Asia. The passage remained elusive until Roald Amundsen navigated it successfully between 1903 and 1906. Number 10. The Mountains of Kong. Like the Mountains of the Moon, the Mountains of Kong are a legendary mountain range charted on maps of Africa from 1798 through at least the late 1880s. The mountains were once thought to begin in West Africa, near the highland source of the Niger River, close to Tambacounda in Guinea. Despite the failure of numerous explorers to locate the range, it continued to appear on maps until late in the 19th century. Cartographers eventually stopped including the mountains on maps after French explorer Louis-Gustave Binger established that the mountains were fictitious in his 1888 expedition to chart the Niger River from its mouth in the Gulf of Guinea and through the Côte d'Ivoire. Number 9. The South China Sea. One of the most common causes of map disputes have to do with political claims over resources. The South China Sea is one such area, rife with cartographic assertions related to territorial claims. China's 9-dash line from 1947, encompassing vast swaths of the sea, is a prominent example of a cartographic claim lacking clear legal basis under international law. By depicting this line on maps, China claims to assert historical rights and sovereignty, which is contested by numerous neighboring countries. This cartographic assertion serves as a powerful tool in geopolitical maneuvering, effectively visualizing and reinforcing China's expansive territorial ambitions in the region, despite international objections. Number 8. Columbus and the New World. Possibly the most famous cartographic error in history, Christopher Columbus's claim that he had discovered India, stemmed from both real geographical misunderstandings and deliberate efforts to promote his achievements. Columbus's belief that he had reached Asia and his persistent underestimation of the Earth's circumference led to inaccurate maps with the New World much closer to the East Indies than they actually were. On top of that, Columbus often exaggerated the size and wealth of the islands he discovered, enticing further exploration and investment. These deceptions played a significant role in shaping European perceptions of the New World and influencing subsequent voyages of conquest. Number 7. German propaganda maps. During World War II, German cartographers employed deceptive techniques to bolster their narrative of victimhood and justify military aggression. Maps emphasized lost territories with significant German-speaking populations after World War I, fueling irredentist claims. Visualizations exaggerated the perceived threat from surrounding nations, depicting Germany as encircled and vulnerable. The concept of Lebensraum, or living space, was graphically illustrated on maps, providing a rationale for eastward expansion into Poland and the Soviet Union. Propaganda maps reinforced notions of German racial superiority and entitlement to dominate Europe, manipulating public opinion and galvanizing support for the war effort, even as they misrepresented reality. Number 6. The Davis Land Incident. A map myth emerged in 1899 when Antarctic explorer John Davis claimed to have sighted land in West Antarctica, resulting in Davis Land being added to maps of the region. However, later expeditions would find no trace of it. And as with other examples from this list, despite the lack of any evidence, Davis Land remained on Antarctic maps well into the 20th century, driving dreams of Antarctic exploration for years. Number 5. The azimuthal equidistant projection and the missile gap. During the Cold War, the azimuthal equidistant projection, centered on Moscow, was sometimes used to amplify the perceived threat of the Soviet Union. By placing the USSR at the center and stretching out surrounding continents, this politically skewed map projection exaggerated the range of Soviet missiles, making North America appear more vulnerable than it truly was. Number 4. Jerusalem as the center of the world. Medieval European maps, especially those produced by Crusaders, often placed Jerusalem at the center of the world, distorting geographical reality to reflect religious cosmology. This Eurocentric and religiously motivated view was driven by the idea that Jerusalem was the axis mundi, or the center of the world where heaven and earth meet. Such maps weren't intended for accurate navigation, but rather to inspire religious fervor and illustrate a divinely ordained world order, with Jerusalem as its spiritual and physical heart. Number 3. The Empty Quarter, Rub al-Khali. Historically, many maps of the Arabian Peninsula depicted the Rub al-Khali, one of the largest continuous sand deserts in the world, as a blank or featureless area. While the desert is sparsely populated, these blank spaces on maps often convey a misleading sense of emptiness and overall lack of importance. In reality, the Rub al-Khali has a rich but hidden history of nomadic habitation, ancient trade routes, and unique geological features. This cartographic depiction, by omitting such details, contributed to a Western-centric view of the region, exemplified by the movie Lawrence of Arabia, overlooking its cultural and historical significance. Number 2. Election maps. Today's political maps can carry misleading elements. A common example is U.S. election maps colored by county, red for Republicans, blue for Democrats. While visually striking, this approach can drastically exaggerate a party's dominance. That's because rural counties, which tend to vote Republican, cover far more land area than densely populated urban counties, which often lean Democratic. As a result, a map may look overwhelmingly red even in an election where the vote was nearly split or won by Democrats. This can create a visual bias that favors geography over population, distorting the true picture of public sentiment and voting behavior. And finally, number 1, population maps. As with many other items on our list, nearly all modern maps are deceptive by failing to accurately represent population size. Land area dominates the visual narrative in both Mercator and Peters projections, leading to skewed perception of global demographics. Canada and Russia appear incredibly vast, implying significant populations when, in reality, their populations are relatively small compared to their landmass. Conversely, densely populated countries like India and Bangladesh appear far smaller than they are, seemingly minimizing their global significance. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MapPack.